Welcome to this explainer. Imagine waking up on what's supposed to be the absolute most joyous morning of the whole year, only to find yourself plunged into a nightmare that completely defies all logic. Today we're diving into a documentary-style investigation of a case that has literally baffled experts, investigators, and armchair detectives for more than 8 decades. We're talking about one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries, and we are going to break down exactly what happened, step by step, using the historical facts as our guide. Here's the paradox that's going to hook you right from the get-go. On Christmas morning, following a devastating house fire, 5 children were simply gone. But they didn't just die in the blaze. They vanished. There were no bodies recovered. There was 0 remains found in the ashes. Absolutely no scientific proof that they perished in that fire. So you have to ask yourself, how does a family lose 5 children in a single night without leaving a single solitary trace behind?
Okay, let's dive into this by setting the scene before everything went terribly wrong. Section 1. The inciting incident. A happy Christmas Eve.
We really have to go back in time to understand the baseline of this event. Picture this. It's Fayetteville, West Virginia, December 24th, 1945. George and Jenny Sodder are raising 10 kids in this quiet little town. The house was full of laughter, the kids were thrilled about their new toys, and it was, by all accounts, a perfectly happy, totally normal Christmas Eve. Just before midnight, most of the family had gone up to bed, but 5 of the younger children convinced their parents to let them stay awake just a little bit longer to play with their gifts. Nobody knew this would be the last time those 5 kids would be seen in that house. Fast forward to 1 a.m. Jenny Sodder is jolted awake by a strange noise, followed immediately by that terrifying smell of smoke. The house was on fire, and the panic was instantaneous. By morning, this large family home was completely reduced to smoldering ashes.
But it's what happened in those dark, chaotic hours between 1 a.m. and sunrise that changes this from a tragic accident into a deeply disturbing mystery. Section 2. The sabotaged escape. So George and Jenny, along with several of the children, did manage to escape the flames safely, but those 5 kids who had stayed up late were supposedly trapped upstairs. George mounted a desperate, frantic rescue attempt, but every single thing he tried to do to save his kids was inexplicably thwarted. Now, what's absolutely wild about these details is the sheer statistical improbability of them happening just by chance. First, George ran to get his house ladder so he could climb up to the second-story window. Well, the ladder, which was always kept in its exact spot outside the house, was completely missing. Then, thinking fast, he decided to pull one of his work trucks up to the side of the house to climb on top of it. He jumps in, turns the key, and the first truck completely refuses to start. He runs over to a second truck. It also refuses to start. These consecutive, bizarre failures trapped the 5 children inside, or at least that's what the family thought as they stood there and watched their home burn to the ground.
When the sun finally came up, the family was mourning the absolute worst. Section 3. The impossible evidence.
Officials arrived to methodically search the ruins, right? They were expecting a grim, tragic, but ultimately very standard recovery effort. But what they actually found completely shattered the whole narrative of a simple house fire. Look, experts are absolutely clear on the science of fire destruction. Even a fire burning hot enough to completely destroy 5 human bodies would still leave significant bone fragments behind. It's a scientific inevitability. But when investigators sifted through the ruins of the Fayetteville home, they found 0 human remains. Not a single bone, not a single trace that 5 children had perished in that space. It was physically impossible for a house fire of that duration to just vaporize 5 bodies.
This impossible physical evidence immediately shifted the narrative. Section 4. Sabotage and strange clues.
The Sodder family began to realize that things simply weren't adding up. I mean, if there were no bodies, then the children weren't in the house when it burned down. And if they weren't in the house, where on earth did they go? As investigators started digging into the events leading up to the fire, they uncovered a trail of bizarre, disturbing clues. First up, it was discovered that the family's phone line hadn't just burned in the fire. It had been deliberately cut before the fire even started. Second, a witness came forward stating they saw a man actively tampering with the electrical wires outside the Sodder home. And third, another witness reported seeing a suspicious vehicle lurking near the property that very same night. When you put all these pieces together, it stops looking like an electrical accident and really starts looking like a carefully orchestrated, targeted conspiracy.
Armed with this crazy new evidence, the Sodders became utterly convinced of a terrifying reality. Section 5. The eyewitness sightings.
Their children hadn't died. They had been kidnapped. And this theory absolutely exploded when compelling eyewitness accounts emerged in the days and weeks that followed.
Get this. One worker at a roadside diner, hundreds of miles away from Fayetteville, was adamant. She said, "I served breakfast to children matching their descriptions," and she wasn't the only one. Another woman in an entirely different state reported seeing the missing children traveling with unfamiliar adults shortly after the fire. Now, these weren't just vague, maybe I saw them kind of sightings. They were specific, chilling, and they aligned perfectly with the theory that the children were pulled from the home right before the fire was set.
The family flat out refused to let the case be swept under the rug. Section 6. The decades-long search.
You know, most families, faced with the ashes of their home and an official police report declaring their kids dead, might eventually, tragically, just give up. But the logic of the missing bones and those cut wires, it drove the Sodders forward. They made sure the entire country knew about this case. The lengths they went to were absolutely incredible. They started by placing extensive advertisements in newspapers all across the country. When official police avenues went cold, they used their own money to hire private investigators to chase down every single lead and every roadside diner sighting. And most famously of all, they built a giant billboard right beside a busy highway. It featured the photographs of their 5 missing children and laid out the strange facts of the fire, literally forcing anyone driving by to look at the mystery. Every lead brought a little hope, and every dead end brought immense heartbreak.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer, relentless dedication of George and Jenny Sodder. 23 years. For over 2 decades, they maintained that billboard. They followed the whispers and the rumors, just waiting and praying for a break in the case. 23 years of silence, until a piece of mail arrived that would reignite the entire investigation.
After 23 years of dead ends, we hit one of the most astonishing turning points in this whole explainer. Section 7, the mysterious 1968 photograph.
Out of nowhere, in 1968, a highly mysterious envelope arrived at the Sodder home. Inside was a photograph showing a young man, and his resemblance to one of their missing sons was absolutely stunning. But it wasn't just the photo. On the back was a cryptic handwritten message making the direct claim that the guy in the image was indeed their missing child. The family was completely shocked. Private investigators immediately sprang into action, trying to trace the postmark and track down the letter's origins, but the sender had covered their tracks perfectly. They were never found. And that photograph became the final, haunting puzzle piece in a case already overflowing with anomalies.
So, where does that leave us today? Section 8. The unanswered questions.
Officially, the history books still state that the children died in the fire, but publicly, logically, and scientifically, the case is debated as a much darker, meticulously orchestrated kidnapping. I mean, why were there no remains? Who cut that phone line? Who moved the ladder? Why did both trucks suddenly fail? And who sent that eerie photograph in 1968? Which brings us to our final question for you to ponder. What really happened on Christmas night in 1945? Did 5 children tragically perish in a fire that somehow defied the laws of physics? Or were they taken away under the cover of night, forced to start completely new lives somewhere else? Perhaps the truth disappeared right along with them. Or maybe someone, somewhere, still holds the final piece to this 80-year-old puzzle. So, what do you think happened to the Sodder children? I would absolutely love to hear your theories in the comments below. Take the facts we've organized here today, look at the clues, and tell me where your logic leads you. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to subscribe if you want to understand more of the world's most unbelievable real-life mysteries. See you next time.